Hello, and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book Outdoor Minimalist: Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. The Outdoor Minimalist podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. In episode 83 of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, I had the pleasure of sitting down with two individuals working to create more equity in the workplace and answering the important question: how are people a part of sustainability in the outdoor industry? Respect Outside founders Gina McClard, JD, and Jim Miller recognized the need for consulting and employee trainings designed for the kinds of bold and adventurous individuals who make their home in the outdoor industry. And so they endeavored to develop a curriculum based on a philosophy of respect and equity in the workplace. Gina McClard has been on the mission to end sexual and gender-based violence for more than 3 decades. As a licensed member of the Oregon and Illinois State Bar Associations, she has used her career to champion the rights of women and underserved groups as a victim's advocate, legislative consultant, and legal counsel in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. From her time in research outposts in Antarctica to her founding of Red Earth Rising, a nonprofit providing critical resources and support services to women and girls in Ugandan refugee camps, her passion for justice and her adventurous spirit have taken her down many paths less traveled. She brings with her an intimate and in-depth knowledge of the culture and legalities of sexual misconduct and violence, as well as decades of experience in how to mitigate and address misconduct in the workplace and beyond. Jim is a graduate of California State University and a lifelong lover of the outdoors. His 30-year career as a member of the outdoor recreation industry includes raft guiding for Mountain Travel-Sobek, marketing and retail training initiatives for brands such as Yakima racks and Werner paddles, ownership of a multi-unit retail specialty store, and consulting to manufacturers and retailers in the outdoor and action sports arenas. In his time in the industry, Jim has seen a number of game-changing initiatives implemented which have driven outdoor companies to the forefront of social awareness and work-life culture. These industry values are what first attracted him, and it is these values which he seeks to advance by creating real change in the ways people of different genders relate and interact while at work. Thank you both, Jim and Gina, for joining me today on the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. I have been looking forward to our interview, and before we get started, I do want to get a little bit more background from each of you. So if you wouldn't mind both introducing yourselves and also telling me a little bit about how you got involved in outdoor recreation and how it fits into your life today.
Great. Well, I'll start. My name is Jim Miller. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a 30-year, almost 40-year veteran now of the outdoor industry. So I started actually fitting ski boots at a small ski shop in San Jose, California in 1982. That really began my journey with work in the outdoor industry. And so I've had lots of different experiences working in the outdoor industry, from raft guiding in college. My first job out of college was teaching outdoor science for the San Bernardino School District. I've worked for brands doing marketing initiatives around retail training, primarily for brands such as Yakima racks and Werner paddles. I've owned my own specialty retail paddle sports store, and have done consulting to brands and retailers about really around retail training initiatives, how to pull product through the pipe, really, how to be curious with your customers and ask questions to get them fitted with the right gear. And, really, I have followed the outdoor industry because of my passion for the outdoors. And I've lived in places like Palisades at Tahoe, Telluride, Colorado, spent 12 years in Jackson, Wyoming. We now call Bend, Oregon home for the past almost 19 years. And so living in a place where there's an abundance of, paddling, hiking, skiing is really what has drawn me to mountain town living, and then to the outdoor industry in its entirety.
And hello, I'm Gina McClard. I'm an attorney who has been working for the past 3 decades or so, trying to improve the criminal and civil justice systems for survivors of violence, survivors of sexual violence. I do not come from the outdoor industry. Jim is the sector of our organization that is well steeped in the outdoor industry. I have been I've been legal counsel to 2 statewide organizations, the Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault and the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, doing everything, providing technical assistance to our members who were the rape crisis centers and the domestic violence shelters in each of those states. Then I joined Lewis and Clark Law School on the faculty there and founded and started the country's first and only crime victim litigation clinic. So we were working and doing amicus litigation on behalf of survivors in all 50 states, in the federal courts and in the state courts, trying to improve the laws for survivors who are going through the system, because there are just so many barriers and problems inherent in the system. So we've been slowly trying to work and change that. I would say if I have a claim to fame in the outdoor industry, it would be that I spent 9.5, 10 months down in Antarctica. I was at McMurdo Station right out of undergrad. And I went down there for 10 months, kind of in between undergrad and law school. And so I had my first taste of sexual harassment down there. But also many, many wonderful things about being down there. I was down there for the fall, winter, and spring. So I was wintering over in the dark Antarctic. But I love being outside. I love doing almost anything with my dogs and hiking out here in beautiful Central Oregon. But I have had my share of trying all different kinds of outdoor ventures. I love to ski, and we love to paddleboard. But I come to this work having my eyes focused on kind of changing what I've seen. Being new to the outdoor industry, I'm kind of analyzing the outdoor industry from my perspective for the first time. So it's been very interesting talking to Jim, who spent his whole life working and living in the outdoor industry, to kind of have these conversations of 2 folks who maybe see things a little bit differently, only because I'm coming from it from a different angle.
Absolutely. Yeah, you guys have a pretty diverse background, like between the 2 of you. So it is interesting. Your story is interesting, how you guys came together to start what you call Respect Outside. And I would love to know how that all happened and came together.
Yeah, so I was at Outdoor Retailer trade show in Denver in 2019, and I was there promoting my consulting business, Retail Revision, where I worked with brands and retailers on training initiatives. And I'd called back home to talk to Gina about all of the sustainability initiatives that I saw. All the brands, it was everywhere you turn. Buy a pair of socks, we'll plant a tree for you, kind of initiatives, right? A very greening message in marketing. And so we were talking about that. And Gina said, so how are people included in sustainability? And my answer at that time was, they're really not in this arena, right? This is very much about supply chain, cradle to cradle initiatives, and greening up your supply chain. Had really nothing to do with how people are treated. And her next question really to me was, well, so how are women treated in the outdoor industry? And I thought, when I started, very few women, and now there's kind of parity. It seems like, we're 50-50 in representation. And so I said, so therefore, right, everything must be good. And Gina really challenged my assumption on that and invited me to have some conversations with folks that have different identities than I do, right? So I am an older, white, heterosexual male, and I just have a lot of, I'm who built the industry, right? I'm who, the industry was built by men like me, that look like me and act like me. And so we really create structures in the outdoor industry that serve men, older white men. And it was shocking to me when I started having conversations with people that have different, more marginalized identities, how they experience both the outdoors and also work in the outdoor industry. And that really lit a fire for us. I came home from that trade show and we started Respect Outside kind of that next day.
Wow, that's a very quick turnaround. And Gina, what is your role specifically with them then?
Well, I am the CEO of Respect Outside, and I kind of bring the research and my experience of training and working to reduce sexual misconduct in the workplace for the last 30 years. So I'm kind of our certainly the legal research department, and we both have experience training, but I have a lot of experience training all kinds of different groups of folks, from students to judges to law enforcement to police. And so now it's a little bit different. It's much more relaxed being in the outdoor industry. I have to say that everybody is very laid back. There is absolutely no pressure on what you wear, which is kind of nice for a lawyer who's been wearing a lot of different hats. It's very, very casual, and I really like that. But it's interesting that we're talking about some of these issues you're talking about, Jim, that you are who made up the outdoor industry, because there are some distinct risk factors about that you will see an increase in sexual misconduct in your workplace if you have some of these risk factors. And what was interesting to me joining the outdoor industry in 2019 was I just didn't expect the outdoor industry to have so many risk factors, and they do. For instance, having gender disparities from the onset of the industry, right? So like it's been predominantly white men, and that is a risk factor for sexual harassment. You have primarily a very youthful workforce, people who are young adults, kind of their first or second jobs, don't really know how to act at work. So that's a risk factor. You have the problem where there's a philosophy in the outdoor industry that folks are kind of divorced from the 9-to-5 corporate world, and they're more renegade. They're more kind of on their own, on the fringes of society, living and working and loving the environment. But that is also something that can encourage the environment of sexual misconduct, because the idea is we don't have to live by the norms. We aren't tied down by the 9-to-5 corporate world. And so we're a little bit more free. But that has a flip side, right? We're a little bit more free from what? From, the rules and norms of society. And that's a problem. I could go on about the risk factors. It was very interesting for me to see that the outdoor industry hangs their hat a lot of on a few things that, like sustainability, doesn't really seem to include the people. And part of that, for instance, safety. So many of our clients, safety is paramount in the outdoor industry, from whether you're an outfitter or even whether you have a retail shop. And when I started to look at safety, I thought that was a great characteristic of an industry. And wouldn't that sort of help prevent sexual misconduct? But in fact, that philosophy hadn't really sent out tentacles to envelop people and psychological safety at work, and whether or not people felt like they were safe to speak up, safe to say, no, I don't think that works for me. And I just found that really ironic. So there are some things that just weren't clicking in the outdoor industry. And I think that's a lot of what we at Respect Outside try to do. We try to sort of, if you already got this great philosophy of safety, well, then it should certainly envelop all the folks that work there for a lot of reasons, right? Everybody's trying to retain good help. And one of the best ways to do that, and one fundamental requirement at work, should be that you're safe at work. And so we really, dig into concepts of safety and show how that can help everybody at work feel more like they belong and more like they're included.
Right. So, I'll add this to what Gina is saying is, so Gina really is very much in charge of the content and the curriculum around our trainings. I handle the kind of the business end of things, so making sure that appointments are met and kept, and that we're where we're supposed to be when we're supposed to be there. And I'm also kind of the the bridge between kind of a legal understanding of what needs to take place in an organization that Gina provides, and the culture that is so rich and predominant in outdoor settings. So, because I've got a wide variety of experiences, I really understand what a manufacturing setting employment looks like, and versus an outfitted business versus a retail setting. So I have experience in all these different areas, and I can, because I know those settings and I know the culture that surrounds them, I can often interpret for Gina about what's happening in an organization.
He's my translator sometimes.
Feels like the perfect team to take on
Yeah.
this role. That's one thing that did draw me to interviewing you guys for the show, is that you did focus on sustainability in the realm of the people and the humans that are actually running the industry. And that has been kind of a trend through the show. A lot of the businesses that I've interviewed really talk about work culture and the importance of that in upkeeping sustainability in other areas. And so I love the work that you're doing. So it's great to see, because I've been in the outdoor industry since university. And I have had my fair share of interesting run-ins with different demographics of people that I have worked with. And I know that there are many, many other people and women that have experienced the same things. I think it has kind of like started to change from my personal experience. I've noticed like a few shifts here and there from when I first entered the industry. But you mentioned, Gina, some of the trends and risk factors, and that you had more of them. And I am definitely interested in what some more of those risk factors are and how they relate to the outdoor industry, but also if they're common in a lot of other fields of work as well.
Right. So a couple that are very, I wouldn't say exclusive to the outdoor industry, but living and working together. So we see this a lot in outfitted businesses and outdoor education, where you have a group of young people that live at base camp, and then they go into the backcountry or side country to do their rafting or climbing or whatever activity they're doing, and then they return to base camp. And so these types of situations, and a lot of employers have said to us, oh, well, that thing happened after work in guide housing, and so therefore not my responsibility. And the fact of the matter is, it is the employer's responsibility. What goes on in guide housing is part of employment, and is you do have a responsibility to your employees to keep them safe from harm while they're in guide housing as well. So culture of drugs and alcohol, I think Gina had mentioned.
No, I didn't mention that, yeah. But that's one. One that's not, the EEOC hasn't designated this as a risk factor, but there is. It was one of the things I have to mention to you, Megan, that was kind of a shock that I hadn't come across in my previous work in other industries, was kind of the culture of nudity. I mean, Jim's a former raft guide, has lots and lots of friends who are raft guides. Now we go on lots of trips in the summer with all of the families, but not that, that's just an example of like one of the fascinomas, as I'll call them, as a lawyer coming into the outdoor industry. You have these, like Jim said, the isolated workplaces, the culture of drugs and alcohol, that it's perfectly all right to be able to relax after work with alcohol, and there's not really any regulations around it. That this interesting thing of of people who do live and work together, sometimes very isolated, the young employees, the fact that the norms have been set by white men in this industry, and they've never really been looked at or changed. And so that is also a potential risk factor. A risk factor is also kind of, I'm going to tag it as like a machismo philosophy, but it's much more kind of what I mentioned about being on the fringes of society, and lots of folks are attracted to the outdoor industry because of the concepts of freedom and being able to be yourself more so than if you were, more of a corporate drudge. But I feel like that isn't, of course, not an inclusive concept to folks who aren't those that made up the industry. So everybody else who's not a white heterosexual male who's in the industry, as we all know, I'm sure feels kind of the restrictions from from an industry that was created by others. And so that's, I feel like, a lot of the work that needs to be done when you're talking about company culture is fostering an inclusive and belonging environment. And when you look at things from your own individual perspective as a owner, as a manager, as the supervisor, on what it means to belong, it's going to look very different than if you are somebody from a marginalized community. So, a lesbian who is, a Black woman, the Black lesbian is going to have a lot more difficulties in the outdoor industry, or frankly, any industry, as we know, just statistically. Black women and Indigenous women face the most problems with workplace sexual misconduct. But, you don't have to have multiple marginalized identities. You could just be on the fringes of mainstream identities and still have problems in the outdoor industry. So really taking a look at where we are in the outdoor industry and then where we want to go. And so that's a very interesting question to a lot of people, because I think we've all seen, or at least if your listeners don't know, there's a lot of research that's come out that says that it will benefit the corporate bottom line. You will increase your profits if you have a more diverse work team. You're going to have more creativity, you're going to have more innovation. And that is wonderful. But how do you get there? This having a goal simply that's set at diversifying your workplace is a little bit premature. We believe that you need to set the table with more inclusive and equitable practices. And then that helps those that you bring in who might be from different cultures or different identities feel more welcome. So there's some work that needs to be done. And we really believe that the starting point for all of this is to think about what could we do here at our organization that would make individuals feel safe and respected from day one. And we really believe that the way you look at behavior in the workplace is critical. I have been looking at companies' policies and procedures, particularly their sexual harassment policies, since the 90s. And it's very similar. The same thread is what I see all the time, which is a big litany of all the things you should not do, all the behaviors you should avoid. And then that's the end of the story around behavior at work. But we think you really should flip that and have a code of conduct or a code of dignity and respectful behavior at work that sets forth all the particular behaviors that you want to see. Really list that out, because, like we've mentioned, the folks in the outdoor industry in large part are really young. And when people are young, they're just not accustomed to being in the workplace and what that means. So when you say, this is how you should act at work, rather than, these are all the terrible, egregious things you shouldn't do at work. And that's really important, because what we know from the recent research after Me Too is that small behaviors that aren't covered by laws against sexual harassment, laws against racial discrimination, any of the discrimination and harassment laws don't apply to these small behaviors that people see day in and day out in the workplace, like being repeatedly interrupted, or having somebody take credit for your work, or having someone who's not really on the agenda kind of grandstand and take up more space in a meeting than is necessary. And so these kind of behaviors, we talk about them as microaggressions and micro inequities. When those behaviors are allowed to live and thrive in an organization, they will lead to more harassment and discrimination. So doing sexual harassment and only focusing on sexual harassment is not the prescription that I would prescribe. I would say, take a big step back and create the vision of how you want everybody to treat each other at work, and then draft a code of conduct accordingly. And that does two things. First of all, from day one, you really are, consciously thinking about how you want people to be treated, how you want people to greet each other, how you want people to really have dignity and respect at the forefront of their mind when they are at work. And then that helps you with all the more difficult, more expensive problems like sexual harassment, racial discrimination, disability discrimination, those things that are really, really serious. But if we're serious about it, trying to reduce sexual misconduct in the workplace, you got to be serious about those small behaviors, because people will leave a workplace because of those small behaviors. People are very picky and they want to be treated with respect and dignity, and they want to feel safe at work. And that is just a very bare bones way to begin that process, is to say, this is how we show up at work and this is how we treat each other.
Yeah, so when you are working with a business or organization, how do those trainings kind of work? Do you have this framework already set up so you can kind of instruct them to rewrite their own handbook? Or yeah,
so a couple of different ways that we can engage with folks, and I'll start with the way that we like the least, which is we get a call. I've got an active problem, right? We've had a report of sexual harassment, and we went to our policies and procedures, and there's no real guidance for us in our procedure around how to take the report or how to do an investigation, which is required by the law once somebody reports. So again, it goes to your organizational documents. So oftentimes it's like, we have a problem, we need help. Other times it's we need help either identifying areas within our corporate documents, our policies and procedures, or code of conduct that can be made to be more inclusive, right? So as Gina was saying, like, how do we welcome people in with this? The first thing that they often see about our organization is this handbook, and how do we make that an invitation to them to come and participate as we'd like to see them at work? So we do that work as well, policy and procedure work. And one thing that really we know makes this work really sticky is leadership. If leadership is on board and all holding hands and standing up together and saying, these are the values of our organization, and then they actually act on those, they are the ones that are standing up for their coworkers, not allowing for those micro inequities and microaggressions to take place. So we often start by coaching leadership and giving them the tools that they need to understand the language and the skills for giving and receiving workplace feedback related to people, right? So it's not about your sales number. It's not about the project being delivered on time. It's about how you treat your coworkers and how you have conversations and dynamics that go between those two people, and what happens when those don't go so well, right? How do we have hard conversations in the workplace about things that are really seem to be very personal, right? They're about my identity, perhaps, or about the way that I've said or done something based on my identity. And those are hard things to do. So we want to coach leadership to understand how to receive that feedback. And the toughest thing is when you have that safe environment and that employee goes to their supervisor and says, hey, I'm the supervisor. And Gina comes to me and says, Jim, in the meeting, you talked over me 3 different times, and I just would like to explore that with you and understand why you did that. It didn't make me feel good. I felt diminished in front of the whole team. Can we talk about why it was that you talked over me in the meeting? And then we can have this dialogue, right? So we want to create a framework for those conversations to take place. And the last way that we work with organizations is kind of all staff training. And so that might look like we have a video on demand piece that is compliance oriented, that gives you the basic language and skills and concepts. And then we follow that with a live training, either via Zoom or we prefer in person, where we come to an organization and we practice the skills around bystander intervention, which is the research proven model for interrupting unwelcome behaviors at work. And then now you've kind of got all the pieces in play, right? You've got your policies and procedures working well, your leadership on board and activating the skills they have around bystander intervention, and the whole team actually being your eyes and ears in the workforce to stop those microaggressions and micro inequities.
If I had to say, what is the briefest of sentences, what Respect Outside does in the outdoor industry, it would be to create a company culture that allows for inclusion and belonging at work. And so I say that because, yeah, we work on policies and procedures. I've been working on corporate policies and procedures for decades. But the important thing is that we align the creativity that I put into policies and procedures that of course covers state and federal law and all the boring compliance aspects of policies and procedures. But we work really intently with leadership on what are the values here? What's your story? And crafting a policy that is meant to be a living document and not this corporate droning on document that's kept in a drawer that nobody ever looks at. This is really the compass used for corporate culture. And so we feel that you have to have leadership's buy-in from the get-go, and then working with leadership to craft the policies and procedures, maybe even bringing, kind of entry-level staff also into those discussions is really helpful, because, there's a lot of different challenges at work these days. And we like to take an intersectional approach at Respect Outside. So taking a look at this opportunity to take something that seems super boring and dry and compliance based and really changing it so that you're continuously looking to improve your culture at work. Because there's been so much research lately that's come out that said the way people feel they are perceived at work is a direct link to whether or not they feel like they're going to stay in that organization for the next 6 months. So we really have to take a look at how people are treated in this industry. And I feel like that may be one area that the outdoor industry is just a little bit, there's many industries that are behind on this, but in particular, I think the outdoor industry feels like our overarching philosophy that brings people to the outdoor industry is enough, should be enough, but it's not enough. It's not
right.
enough.
And so, we talk about how we tag to the values of an organization, right? And oftentimes those values in outdoor education and outfitted businesses are safety, right? Because they've got a risk management plan that's 900 pages long. Every conceivable incident is talked about. And even if you have a near miss in the field, you go home and you debrief with your group about that so that you can learn from that. And what we're saying is, let's do the same thing as it relates to our interactions with people. And so oftentimes we talk to people about sexual harassment and unwelcome behaviors of all sorts. They don't exist just in the isolation of your work group, right? They come from everywhere. They come from the ranger, right? The third party ranger. They come from the public. They come from your guests. They come from your clients. So knowing how to, and really interesting, we worked with an organization that was going back to a trade show environment for the first time after COVID. And they engaged with us because they had a small group. It was like eight or nine folks on the team. And they're like, we're in really good shape. We communicate really well. We're not so worried about us, but we go to this trade show where we have all of our dealers show up and they're all drinking beer and in kind of this part, like, are we working or are we on vacation? Their trade shows are a different beast, right? And they were receiving a lot of unwelcome conduct at their trade show environment. So we work with them on how to kind of, again, bystander intervention. How do you stop that? How do you stand up for your teammate when you see something that is not quite right happening?
I know that when I speak to just individuals out in the real world, very few people realize that employers have a responsibility to keep their staff free from sexual harassment, regardless from where it comes. So sexual harassment by third parties is a huge problem. And employers are just as responsible for keeping somebody who's working on the retail floor safe from sexual harassment from the, individual who walked in off the street. So it's really interesting. The law is broad and the focus should be similarly broad, but oftentimes it's not.
And the challenge, I think, often comes to language, right? So when we do surveys and we'll send out a survey and we'll talk about have you experienced sexual harassment at work? And we'll have like very low reporting on that, right? Oh, I've never had sexual harassment in the workplace. But if you ask a different question, if you ask, have you ever received a joke, an inappropriate joke at work? And the answer is yes. Was that joke related to your race or your gender or your sexual orientation or sexual identity? And the answer is yes, right? All of a sudden, what you have is sexual harassment, but it's just not named that way. And people think of sexual harassment as I'm being pushed up against the wall by the boss, and they're trying to kiss me. And if I don't give in, then I'm going to lose my job. That's what everybody thinks of as sexual harassment, but it is so much more nuanced than that.
If you just ask people, do you feel like you've been exposed to sexual harassment at work? You're going to have generally around 40% of folks, which is high. 40% of folks say, yes, maybe. But once you start describing different things that are deemed as sexual harassment, and you ask people more specifically, the numbers go up like crazy. So I think it's a matter of making sure that people understand what they're supposed to be protected from. And that's where being more specific in your policies and procedures and training on this, so there are 5 states that mandate sexual harassment training in the United States. But what people don't realize is that every single state that has some sort of, Department on Fair Employment or human rights, if it's called that, it's called different things in every state. But each one of those organizations statewide say you should be training on these issues with your entire staff every year. And so that is something that's really important, is you've got to know what you're trying to prevent in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like there are so many things in the outdoor industry and so many different companies and people that can learn a lot from you guys. So to kind of close things out, I do want to know how listeners can learn more about you guys and your work, and even contact Respect Outside in case they do want to set up a more sustainable framework at their business.
Well, great. So yeah, we are respectoutside.com, and Jim at respectoutside.com is my email. My phone number, 541-410-5576. Email us, call us, text us, get us on our website. And then on our social channels, we are on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook as well. You can follow us there for other information about harassment prevention and creating cultures of belonging in the outdoor industry.
I'll be sure to share all that information in the show notes as well, so people can access that easily. But with that, thank you for taking the time to share all those wonderful resources on the show.
Great.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at theoutdoorminimalist.com. For even more updates, educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.